Well, a lot to get through this morning, a lot in the papers, a bit of an eclectic mix on this Sunday morning, I must admit. Let's go through it all now with my fellow GB News presenter who's on from 11, Michael Portillo, of course, the former Defence Secretary. Michael, thanks for joining me this morning.
Good morning, Camilla.
Lovely to see you. Let's talk about the Met being in the dock. So
yes.
We've got Mark Rowley facing an offensive on a number of fronts over this extraordinary situation involving Gideon Falter. He's been on this show. He's the CEO of the Campaign Against Antisemitism. He's stopped at a pro-Palestinian march, which he basically stumbles on. He's in town on Saturday. He ends up stumbling on the march. He's in his kippah, his skull cap, and basically the police turn around and say that, you know, he's too openly Jewish to be there and may prove to be a provocation. And then a little later on, he gets threatened with arrest. And the Met Chief Commissioner, Mark Rowley, is now under fire. Suella Braverman, the former Home Secretary, calling for him to step down. Your reaction, Michael?
Well, Gideon Falter has an article himself this morning, which is very moving because, as you say, he was simply returning apparently from synagogue and he was trying to cross a road and there was this demonstration. And it's not as though he was just standing there and the demonstration just went by. Apparently there were people in the crowd baying at him words like scum and Nazi. And notice that no action was taken by the police against the people who were baying at him. They were baying at him, presumably because he was openly Jewish, that is to say he was wearing his kippah. And as we know, the police officers who were present, supposedly out of concern for his safety, but they seem to give the impression that he was a provocation and that he should remove himself. Now, a lot of people have been very concerned that every weekend these demonstrations are occurring, that expressions like from the river to the sea are used routinely, that swastikas have appeared on some occasions, that the crowd jeers from behind masks at passers-by, calls them scum and so on. And this now seems to become entirely routine. And equally, it's become entirely routine that Jewish citizens find that they can't go to these places where the marches are. And indeed, it now seems to be that the police think they should be moved on. By the way, when they did move on, the Gideon Falter and his group of friends, they were followed by the police to make sure that they didn't return and offer more provocation. So this is all very unsatisfactory. Suella Braverman has launched into this, possibly trying to settle old scores with Mark Rowley. I don't think this will have the consequence of removing the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, but it's certainly putting pressure on the way that these marches are policed. And I think it raises the question about whether they all have to be allowed to go ahead and the circumstances in which they're allowed to go ahead and the things that people are allowed to say and allowed to display on their banners while this is going on. Because at the moment, it appears that the law-abiding citizen is set to one side and that the mob is given precedence. And that is, after all, what Suella Braverman used to refer to as two-tier policing.
Yes. And when it comes to the government's response to this, I think there's been a bit of buck passing because the government keeps on saying that the Met Police have the powers, and yet the Met Police are saying, well, they seem to be being a bit ambivalent about that and questioning whether they do have the powers that the government says they have. I think we're now getting to the stage where people's patience with these marches is running out. Remember when we heard from the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, sort of saying, oh, you've made your point now. I suppose the government's trying to support the right to protest because there has been some criticism of them trying to curtail that with other legislation. So Rishi Sunak's in a bit of a tricky position here because he doesn't, as a Conservative, want to look as if he's shutting down legitimate protests, while at the same time I think there are quite a few people looking at these marches still going on after 6 months and saying enough's enough.
Going on every week as well. I mean, they've virtually become a British institution, these demonstrations. And that, I think, is a very unfortunate position. And, you know, whether in our liberality we are obliged to have marches every single week, particularly marches that make a lot of people feel very uncomfortable, I very much doubt. I don't have enough knowledge of the law to know what further leeway the government might have on this. But I think a lot of people are fed up with the fact that this has just become a part of London life, and would very much hope that things could be changed. I
mean, we may have crossed the Rubicon when it comes to the way that Mr Falter was dealt with, because I think most people watching that just thought it was completely iniquitous to have him facing arrest, while, as you say, Michael, those chanting scum and Nazi to a Jewish man in a skull cap aren't told off by the police. Nothing happens to them. It doesn't seem right.
No, well, that I think is why Suella Braverman has returned to the fray today, because she did use this expression, two-tier policing. It was one of the things that cost her job.
Yes.
And, you know, what better demonstration of two-tier policing than that? It might be said, of course, that also the Met made the most appalling botch of its apology. And indeed...
yes, this withdrawing of tweets and things was just...
And Gideon Forter says that even today he hasn't really received an apology.
But your instinct is that for now Rowley's safe, is it?
I think Rowley will go on, but the pressure is on. And there's a lot of people quoted in the article who are calling for his head. The number of people calling for his head is now quite a large number.
We'll find out from Claire Coutinho later whether the government has confidence in the Met Police Commissioner. Let's move on to defence matters now. Quite interesting, this, an intervention from Penny Mordaunt. Can't think why she might be writing an opinion piece in the Sunday Telegraph about the idea of the UK having an Iron Dome to replicate Israel's defence protection system.
The question really is whether this is defence or attack.
Yes.
It appears to be about defence, but it might be Penny Mordaunt's attack. Well, first of all, to the issue itself, which is she's proposed that we should have an Iron Dome. I must say it is deeply impressive what the Israelis have. The fact they could face hundreds of projectiles from Iran and only one or two, well, fewer than 1%, reach their target is deeply impressive. And we have nothing like that whatsoever. The nature of warfare is changing. It's being illustrated by what's happening in the Middle East and by what's happening in Ukraine and Russia. And I don't know whether we have caught up at all with the nature of the changes. So, we're still invested in, tanks and ships and aircraft. What's going on now is a war of missiles and drones and so on. And I don't know how adept we are either at launching those technologies or defending ourselves against the technology. So I think actually Penny Mordaunt's point is pretty well made in itself. However, because defence spending is not being increased by either party in its plans, there are rather mealy-mouthed projections about when defence spending might be increased. And as I've said to you before on this programme, because defence spending is so poorly spent anyway, there's absolutely no prospect of Britain getting an Iron Dome. And I find it fascinating that, even now as Ukraine is slowly, losing the war against Russia, even as we see the danger of Israel being attacked by Iran, still it doesn't cause defence spending either to be raised or to be changed in this country.
And the justification for not raising defence spending from both the Prime Minister and indeed Jeremy Hunt, literally in that chair a few weeks ago, well, we must be prudent and we must be a careful government. You sort of think, well, wouldn't it be prudent to increase defence spending with the world seemingly on the brink of World War III?
I find it extraordinary, the extent to which it doesn't change political attitudes. And by the way, we haven't referred to this, but there's been this very important vote in the House of Representatives where the £50 billion package which has been given to Ukraine, which is very important. We in Britain, rather grandly say, look at this vote. It's been tied up in domestic politics for all this time. Terrible Americans confusing domestic policy and foreign policy. That's exactly what we do.
Yes.
Because we're not prepared to spend either enough or well enough on defence. And none of that is changing despite all the threats. By the way, I'm heartened by the vote in the House of Representatives in the short term. I'm also disheartened in the sense that I don't think there'll be another vote. I think,
this is it.
That is it.
Yeah.
And it's not enough for Ukraine to win, and it's not enough for Ukraine to avoid defeat. And I think it's deeply depressing that the message that we send to the world is that the West gets war weary very quickly.
Yes. And also, if it is the last package of aid before the next US election, then one has to ask oneself the question of what happens should President Trump have a resurgence.
Oh, yes, I meant the last package ever.
Ever.
Because,
indeed, even if Biden gets back in.
Unless the Democrats won the presidency and the House and the Senate.
Yes.
It's difficult to see how you'd have another package. And even I think the Democrats aren't immune to war weariness.
Well, the trouble is as well, with him having upped his own defence spending, Vladimir Putin, to, I think, 7.5% of GDP, he's not getting war weary, is he?
No.
He's just investing more and more and more in it.
No, and he's not the only one taking the signals from the West into account, because China will take these signals into account as well. Let's
have a quick word on Angela Rayner, just because I haven't had a chance to speak to you about this story. I mean, the Mail on Sunday still got the bit between their teeth. They've now got some documentary evidence of the idea that she did have these two homes, and there may have been some anomaly, let's put it that way, with a capital gains tax bill. Do you think that Angela Rayner's position is tenable at the moment?
Yes, it's tenable at the moment. Let me say why I think this matters. It's very interesting that people on the left of politics always think that the solution to everything is more public spending. So if you find that someone is not willing to put in their fair share of taxation, that would be a very serious finding against them, wouldn't it? So that's why I think it matters. Now, it is perfectly true that there is a huge campaign being launched by titles that are on the right of politics, like the Telegraph and the Mail. However, they don't seem to have any shortage of people to help them, because last week we had pretty damaging testimony from a fellow called Matt Finnegan, who was her former chief advisor. And today in the Mail on Sunday, there's very damaging testimony from a lady called Sylvia Hampson, who was her neighbour, who was Angela Rayner's neighbour, in Vicarage Road, I think. It all gets very confusing, this. And in fact, this person, Sylvia Hampson, knew Angela Rayner well enough to sign a document for her regarding the sale of the property. So if this person is calling Angela Rayner, as she does, a something liar, then that's quite serious. So, I mean, it is true that the right-wing press is out to get Angela Rayner, but they are being helped by people who are supposedly either Angela Rayner's friends or Angela Rayner's ex-friends, which raises interesting questions.
But also the notion that this isn't a story. I mean, there's a piece in the Mail on Sunday questioning why the Guardian hasn't really covered this. BBC's barely looked at it. There is a story here, Michael, because she's being accused of lying, and she's a woman who wants to be the next Deputy Prime Minister.
And someone who believes in public spending and therefore must believe in paying the fair share of taxes. And I think she made an error, surely, by saying that she'd had this advice that she wasn't prepared to publish. I don't think I would have gone that route. No. Because, everybody then wants to see it.
Indeed so. Michael, we're going to have to leave it there for time reasons. But lovely to see you, and we're going to see you back on our screens on this channel at 11 o'clock. So look forward to that. Thank you very much.